was ahead of its time. So the basic principles of its steering and its drivability are the basic principles we use today.
I don't know, it's got a shape, hasn't it? You know, it does stand out, I think.
You do form an emotional attachment with them.
I just want to stroke it, you know.
Designed by the greatest British car designer that we've ever produced.
I feel that I'm more in touch with the road when I'm driving the Miner as opposed to a modern car.
The Morris Miner, a car that should be a relic of the past and left to rust in peace in barns across Britain. But there's life in the old girl yet, and Morrises are alive and well, thanks to a new generation of drivers.
I'm Matt Coles, I run the Young Members Register. I'm from Cardiff. I've got a 1967 four-door. I've always liked older cars. They're fairly economical and they're reasonably priced classic.
Well, I come across it on eBay quite a while back, so we went down to have a look at it and we ended up getting it cheaper than what it was on there for, and it's sort of meant to be, really, wasn't it? We came home with it from London, so we did, how many miles was that?
Well, it was a good way, wasn't it? I don't know, 160 miles or something like
miles,
that.
yeah, and it did it fine.
Just started all right, didn't it?
Yeah, it was all right, yeah.
The attraction, I think, to younger drivers is there is that they can get involved themselves. They won't feel so alienated of a car. A lot of our customers come back because they're alienated from their car now. There's nothing they can do themselves. They have to go to a garage even for an oil change.
My mum drove it home from Southend-on-Sea to Aylesbury, and it was an experience. It hadn't been driven in a little while. It had an MOT and tax, but the brakes were spongy. And started to think this is probably the biggest mistake I've ever made. But just as soon as we started driving around, just absolutely fell in love.
Now, although it didn't pull off the Italian job like the Mini, it had plenty of bit parts, and some others do have them, open all hours, and even popped up in the Steve McQueen film Bullet.
I think it's one of those cars that everyone's had. As I said, unlike, say, a Rolls Royce or something, you know, not many people have owned them, whereas, you know, everyone's grandfather, father, someone in their family at some point has owned a Morris Minor. And they just can relate to the car, you know, memories from being a child or something like that.
It was just, you know, we were there, the Morris Minor was there. You know, we wanted a van, he was a van, so we sort of met and we interacted for a while. So I suppose it's just representative, really, of, you know, it's a natural representation of our experience at that time, you know.
I had a Morris for, must have been 14 years, different Morrises. Started with a Traveller, loved that. Traveller was brilliant because at that age, you know, estate cars are expensive, more expensive than saloon. But I was a musician, so I was able to put a drum kit, a couple of amps, a guitar, and 3 members of the band in the back. And you came in a car and everyone remembered you. It's like, oh, that's the band with the Morris, brilliant.
Lee said somebody's selling a van, you know, and then we had 2 of them, and it was sort of quite a nice van at the same time, yeah. And I'd never had my own car before, so that was, you know, that was sort of exciting. And I bought it. I can't remember how much it was, 100 quid or something. They were all everything was 100 quid in those days. It might have been a bit more. Maybe it was 140 or something.
The first Morris Minor I bought was, I think it cost 80 quid. It was a black Morris Minor with a clutch problems. And I was in Bath at the time, and Bath is deep in a bowl with steep hills, and I remember having some quite hairy moments.
I had a delivery job then, and I was delivering mainly for ad agencies in the West End, and sometimes a bit more exotic. You'd have to go out to Mitcham or somewhere and try not to get lost. You know, you're on a bit of a tight schedule, especially, you know, you've been in the cafe for too long at lunch and stuff. You know, they're ringing up on the radio, you know, Kilo 14, where are you, where are you? And I took this wrong turn, and so that went for miles.
And then I met Penny, and we weren't brought together by the Morris Minor, but she'd got one. And we did actually get engaged in my Morris Minor. And it was in a place called Massam in the Yorkshire Dales, pouring with rain and everything. But I had to lean across, and one of the things about the Morris Minor, aficionados will know, is it has this very big gear stick with a big bubble on top. So that was an obstacle to kind of true love. But anyway, she said yes.
Because that whole time has gone. So when you see those cars, I mean, any of those old cars, you go inside it and there's this smell that you don't get anymore, you know. which I don't know if it's good or bad, but it certainly brings you back to a sort of previous time, I find, when you smell that.
The Morris Minor is as British as James Bond, the Beatles and Doctor Who. But is that why it's lasted so long?
Morris Minor enthusiasts and owners I've met have, without exception, been very fond of their car in a way that isn't always the case. They haven't wanted to kind of show off. It's very, very common for them to have names. And that's not exclusive to the Morris Minor, but it's very, very strong in the Morris Minor.
I didn't name him. He's called Derek. It's a very long story.
I just knew what her name was, so it was really weird. And I asked when I turned up, because it's bad luck to change a car's name. And he was like, well, she don't have a name, does she? Just a car. And I was like, oh, right, okay. I was like, well, I'll roll with my name for her then. So she just became Nancy.
Ever since I thought of having one, I said I'm going to call it Molly. That's the only thing. Don't know why.
What was its previous name?
It was called Sybil before, but we changed the name to Molly because we thought that was more
two
suiting.
owners, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's had two owners, yeah.
This is Mavis. She's named, she inherited the name from the previous owner, but it's the name of the first owner on the brown logbook, which is quite a nice little bit of history. Mavis from Torquay.
Unlike modern cars, they do have a character, and they do have that smiley face look. And if you look at sort of some of the modern cars now, people seem to be going back to that way of putting the eyelashes on and basically ornamenting the cars back to this cheery, cheeky face.
And it has got a sort of a happy face, but it's sort of mean at the same time. I think I like the mean, sort of slightly mean look about it. I mean, that sort of song came a bit about, I remember, you know, we used to listen to Ian Drury a lot in those days, and he was in a band called Kilburn and the High Roads. But in those days, somebody would grab a microphone, I'm going to have a go at singing, and immediately this American accent would come over the whole thing, and it's like, what the, you know, what's this all, why the American accent? I mean, it's bizarre, really. And Ian Drury didn't have that, you know, he didn't have any of those sort of pretensions. I guess, you know, taking that as a sort of inspiration, I was sort of, you know, something mundane driving in your car. But I did like, you know, I like it, you know, you're out of town, you leave all your worries behind and the window down, you know, with a bit of trouble. And it's nice. I think, you know, I'm sure a lot of people enjoy that. I mean, you know, you get the American thing, don't you? They're all going to the beach with the surfboards in the back. We were more practical, weren't we? It's like basic, you want to get the job done, A to B. bit of a nice feature on the front.
Has any other British car been treated with such love and affection? These days it's not unusual to find a Morris Minor at a wedding, a school prom, or even a funeral.
I'm Andrew Bywater. Due to my interest in Morris Minors, I was able to give up the day job and move on to this part-time lifestyle business. We started off with the daily driver, we moved into the wedding cars, and then we saw an opportunity to test the market. At the start of the recession, we were finding that the wedding hire was dropping off a little bit. Because it's a discretionary purchase, some people were deciding to put the wedding off a little bit. And it's an unfortunate fact of life that you can't avoid death. But thinking positively, we thought, well, why not possibly something to do with a Morris Minor hearse? The regular preconception is that coffin just won't fit. But armed with the experience that we've had with the wedding cars, where we take the front seat out, we got the tape measure out one day, and we came back and we got just over 6'6", which will be more than enough for most coffins. And as people get older, they tend to get smaller. We've got a little bit of an area here behind the split seat there for the funeral director. But we're also conscious that we wanted somebody in the back of the car who might know where they were going. The cars have been a large part of people's lives. They've grown up with them. A lot of enthusiasts have got various Morris Minors, and it's comforting to know in advance of the day that they may need it, is that there is something there that they can take their final journey on. We got this economic car that does 30, 40 to the gallon on the drive, Since I'd finished the day job, I've got plenty of other Morrises to drive. It was redundant at that time, so we thought, well, why not pass it on to her if she's happy to drive it?
I nearly cried. Actually, no, I think I did cry when my dad took the engine out of it. You know, I was only little, but I thought he was going to kill the car. He's taken the engine up, and I was ever so upset. You know, everyone at uni are just like, oh, just get a new car, it's old, it's cold, it's a banger. You know, I'm like, no, stop, it's mine. They get in the car, and it's just like, well, what are all these knobs? It's just, okay, well, I've got a choke. What's a choke? It's really nice sitting like in a traffic queue thinking, ha, my car's better than yours. You may not think it, but it definitely is. It's more fun to drive.
I think she's grown into the cars as well. It started off from a practical point of view, but they do tend to get under your skin after a while. Because back in the 70s when I was a teenager, to be honest, I wouldn't have been seen dead in one, and I never thought that I would actually run a part-time business with it.
Driving a Morris Minor is like having a lovely cup of tea. It's about chugging along pleasantly until you reach your destination.
There's just something about driving a classic car that's hard to pinpoint unless you just jump in it and drive it. You know, it's hard to explain.
It's so simple at the dash. You've got a couple of switches and it does everything.
It's a bit of a shock to start with, you know, coming from a nice modern car, power steering, ABS, but it's really simple. It's really interesting to drive, and you tend to find people wave at you. I've pulled up at traffic lights before, and this man motioned me to wind my window down, and he's like, I love your car, you know. I used to have one, and I'm thinking, yep, the lights are going to change in a minute, thank you, nice chatting, but I really need to go.
When you're driving with the window down, you hear people's remarks when you're driving past, oh, it's a Morris Minor. And
you had old people in car parks come up to you
yes,
as well,
oh,
just
that was
strange
my one.
people.
That was my first car. That was in 1958 or whatever like that. And it's nice to hear people say that. Really,
yeah, you do get more. I think if you was in an M3, people would look at you less.
If you see a traffic warden, like what happened yesterday, I hadn't bought a ticket, but the traffic warden didn't stamp me like he did on the other cars. He just came over and talked to me about the car and said he loved it, which was quite handy because he didn't have the money to pay anyway.
I passed my test and I started driving in this, which was very scary, you know, thinking, oh, you know, no instructor next to me now, you know. And then I did a Pass Plus course, and I had to get back in a modern car, and the change was totally different. But I felt like when I was in that modern car, I was like, well, I'm driving as if I'm still in, you know, my Morris Minor. It's like I'm slowing down earlier, I'm more aware of things around me, which I think has made me a better driver.
So they're a really easy first car to have, and I think people become attached to them and they get passed down through families and stuff like that.
I'm a Guinness drinking Morris Minor man. You know, you've got to be patient, you take your time, you don't rush it, and a lot of our customers have that same attitude to it. They want to get to A to B, but they don't see it having to be a rush, that you always have to be there right then. It's like, well, let's leave half an hour early and enjoy the drive.
To commemorate its 60th birthday, the Morris Minor even got its own biography.
I have to admit, I'm not a car, I'm not a petrol head, as they call them. And what interested me for the book about the Morris Minor was I kept coming across examples of extraordinary devotion. I remember one couple they'd put in new carpets, they had curtains, they had their own lighting. It was like travelling in a little tiny suburban 1950s living room, you know, and which in a way was another part of the appeal of the car.
I don't know if there is a typical minor owner. We're all a very diverse bunch.
I've been going out with the car longer than you.
Yeah. That he did say that their car was his love of his life before he met me.
The community, the club, is fantastic, and particularly the young members. None of us have got a lot of money to splash around, so when we see sort of a few bits and bobs here and there going cheap, we pick them up.
We're all on Facebook as well. We ask each other questions. Oh, my car's making this noise, blah 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 blah, and they tell you how to fix it and stuff like that. Everyone's got to know each other quite well.
Between 1948 and 1971, some 1.3 million Morris Minors were made, with about 8,000 of them still on the road today.
Well, there were well over 1 million cars built. By 1961, the Minor Million was released to celebrate 1 million cars. So there was clearly something from day one that really took off. They're just well put together car. The A-Series engine's pretty bomb-proof and easy to maintain. Something that really appeals to keeping them on the road now is the parts availability. Almost everything that was left the production line in 1971 is still available from 3 or 4 different places.
So physically and practically, it's a durable car. Cut away the rust, patch her up, and she keeps going.
You can pick a Miner up, mechanically sound one, maybe a bit rough around the edges for, say, £1,000. And you know, slowly take your time to do it up yourself. It's running, so you can drive around in it and just take weekends or whatever to bring it up to the scratch that you want it at.
So I've used this for about 20 years now, and I've basically modified this car for daily use. You've got to be mindful of the fact that this is a 60-plus-year-old design, so you haven't got the crash protection that you would in a modern car, but there again, you're not doing the speeds, it doesn't encourage you to drive aggressively. Seat belts is another thing. A car of this age would not have been built with seat belts and on the rear in this car, because there are always friends going to want to get in with a youngster and it helps to keep them safe as well.
A Morris Minor isn't built to collapse. Chances are a modern car will crumple and the Morris will have a couple of dents at the front, but it won't, and the damage won't be the same way. It won't be written off. And it's wasteful, fundamentally. It's a great big waste. So when you buy a Morris, you know that you're buying something that's sustainable and durable and is built to last. And if you have any sort of, even if you have a tiny conscience about the environment, you're working on a level there.
And the insurance is, well, your first year obviously is a little more expensive, but in comparison to the ridiculous quotes that I've heard of my friends getting on modern cars of like £3,000-4,000 for their first year, my first year on this was just over £1,000. So although a lot of money, in comparison, you know, it's a cheap car to run.
I'd say don't go for the first one you see. The right one will come along eventually, like this one did, because I was going to go for one. It turned out it was a complete rust bucket.
I mean, I bought my first one having no mechanical knowledge whatsoever, and through tinkering around with the car myself and people in the club who are willing to help you learn, I now do all the maintenance on it myself.
The idea of the young members was to identify the younger generation, identify us to the main club as people who are, let's face it, we are the future. They're not going to be around forever. As sad as that sounds, they're not. And if they don't impart their knowledge to us now, then there's not going to be anyone to keep these cars on the road.
You have to love the car. Don't just buy a car because you think, oh, it's going to be cheap to run, because that's the wrong reason to buy a classic car, because you'll end up getting to winter when it's cold and your seats are freezing and you'll think, I'm not doing this anymore, and you'll go out and buy a modern car and you won't have appreciated it for what it is. You've got to appreciate it for what it is. You've got to want the car for all the quirks and all the bad points as well as good points.
Simple, individual, British and loved. It'll get you from A to B and you'll still have change left for a real ale, a pot of tea, or even a bag of chips.
But yeah, they're nice, sort of functional in those days. Yeah, everything was just doing its job, you know, nothing fancy, nothing overly fabricated or anything.
The brand now belongs to actually the Chinese government, that their nationalised car industry bought it out. So if anybody's going to produce a new Morris Minor, you know, the Fiat have done it with the Fiat 500, and the Mini is the great example. It's a great one. I hope it happens.
So long as there's fuel to go in the car, so long as government aren't going to stop us driving them, we'll be driving them.
One interesting thing I think about the Morris Minor is what could have happened but didn't, and that's that it didn't become the VW of the world, and I think it had quite a lot to do with their failure to sell it properly in America. VW played the game, and the VW massively outsold the Morris Minor. If Morris Motors and then British Leyland, the British Motor Corporation, had been more wised up, I think it could have been the best-selling car in the world.